I'm telling you, everything I touch is falling apart. All right, give me a second here. I just dropped my webcam down the back, which is a daily occurrence. All righty. Hi, welcome to Little House Live, day 19. How's everybody doing? Welcome. Remember, there could be children watching this, folks, so please mind your P's and Q's in the chat. Oh, Scheisenheimer. The hell just happened? Close. Whew. And I just lost my keyboard. Again. Hang on a second, folks. There it comes. It's coming back. There we go. So, I had a little panic attack about 2 minutes ago when I couldn't find the book. Where are we? That is not. Independence Day. Yes, it is. All right, let me change my glasses. We read Independence Day last week. So, I'm going to just tilt the phone just a little bit so that you guys don't get blinded. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. I'll just have to do the best I can with the lighting I have. All right. Welcome to Little House Live, day 19, Farmer Boy, chapter 17. Summertime. In the summertime, do. The sunshine was hotter now, and all the green things grew quickly. The corn thrust its rustling narrow leaves waist high. Father plowed it again, and Royal and Almanzo hoed it again. Then the corn was laid by. It had gained so much advantage against the weeds that it could hold the field with no more help. The bushy rows of potatoes almost touched, and their white blossoms were like foam on the field. The oats rippled gray-green, and the wheat's thin heads were rough with young husks, where the kernels would grow. The meadows were rosy purple with the blossoms that the bees loved best. Work was not so pressing now. Almanzo had time to weed the garden and to hoe the row of potato plants he was raising from seed. He had planted a few potato seeds just to see what they would do, and every morning he fed his pumpkin that he was growing for the county fair. Father had shown him how to raise a milk-fed pumpkin. They had picked out the best vine in the field and snipped off all the branches but one, and all the yellow pumpkin blossoms but one. Then between the root and the wee green pumpkin, they carefully made a little slit on the underside of the vine. Under the slit, Almanzo made a hollow in the ground and set a bowl of milk in it, and then he put a candle wick in the milk, and the end of the candle wick he put carefully into the slit. Every day the pumpkin vine drank up the bowl full of milk through the candle wick, and the pumpkin was growing enormously. Almanzo... Am I missing a page? No. Oh, sorry. Already it was 3 times as big as any other pumpkin in the field. Almanzo had his little pig now, too. He had bought her with his $50, and she was so small that he fed her at first with a rag dipped in milk. But soon she learned to drink. He kept her in a pen in the shade because young pigs grow best in the shade, and he fed her all she could eat. She was growing fast, too. So was Almanzo, but he was not growing fast enough. He drank all the milk he could hold, and at mealtimes he filled his plate so full that he could not eat it all. Father looked stern because he left food on his plate and asked, "What's the matter with you, son? Your eyes bigger than your stomach?" Then Almanzo tried to swallow a little more. He did not tell anyone he was trying to grow up faster so he could break the colts. Every day, Father took the 2-year-old colts out, one by one on a long rope, and trained them to start and stop when he spoke. He trained them to wear bridles and harnesses and not to be afraid of anything. Pretty soon, he would hitch each one up with a gentle old horse and teach it to pull a light cart behind it without being scared. But he wouldn't let Almanzo even go into the barnyard while he was training them. Almanzo was sure he wouldn't frighten them. He wouldn't teach them to jump or balk or to try and run away. But Father wouldn't trust a 9-year-old. That year, Beauty had the prettiest colt Almanzo had ever seen. He had a perfect white star on his forehead, and Almanzo named him Starlight. He ran in the pasture with his mother, and once when Father was in town, Almanzo went into the pasture. Beauty lifted her head and watched him coming, and the little colt ran behind her. Almanzo stopped and stood perfectly still. After a while, Starlight peeked at him under Beauty's neck. Almanzo didn't move. Little by little, the colt stretched its neck towards Almanzo, looking at him with wondering wide eyes. Beauty nuzzled its back and switched her tail. Then she took a step and bit off a clump of grass. Starlight stood trembling, looking at Almanzo. Beauty watched them both, chewing placidly. The colt made one step, then another. He was so near that Almanzo could almost have touched him, but he didn't. He didn't move. Starlight came a step nearer. Almanzo didn't even breathe. Suddenly, the colt turned and ran back to its mother. Almanzo heard Eliza Jane calling, "Monzo!" She had seen him. That wasn't how she called it. She went, "Monzo!" She had seen him. That night she told Father. Almanzo said he hadn't done a thing. Honest, he hadn't. But Father said, "Let me catch you fooling around with that colt again, and I'll tan your jacket. That's too good a colt to be spoiled. I won't have you teaching it tricks that I'll have to train out of it." The summer days were long and hot now, and Mother said this was good growing weather, but Almanzo felt that everything was growing but him. Day after day went by, and nothing seemed to change. Almanzo weeded and hoed the garden. He helped mend the stone fences. He chopped wood and did the chores. In the hot afternoons, when there wasn't much to do, he went swimming. Sometimes he woke in the morning and heard rain drumming on the roof. That meant he and Father might go fishing. He didn't dare speak to Father about fishing because it was wrong to waste time in idleness. Even on rainy days, there was still plenty to do. Father might mend harness or sharpen tools or shave shingles. Silently, Almanzo ate breakfast, knowing that Father was struggling against temptation. He was afraid Father's conscience would win. "Well, what are you going to do today?" Mother would ask. Father might answer slowly, "I did lay out to cultivate the carrots and mend fence." "Well, you can't do that in this rain." "No," Father would say. After breakfast, he would stand looking at the falling rain till at last he would say, "Well, it's too wet to work outdoors. What do you say we go fishing, Almanzo?" Then Almanzo ran to get the hoe and the bait can, and he dug worms for bait. The rain drummed on his old straw hat. It ran down his arms and back, and the mud would squeeze cool between his toes. He was already sopping wet when he and Father took their rods and went down across the pasture to Trout River. Nothing ever smelled so good as the rain on clover. Nothing ever felt so good as the raindrops on Almanzo's face and the wet grass swishing around his legs. Nothing ever sounded so pleasant as the drops pattering on the bushes along Trout River and the rush of water over the rocks. They stole quietly along the bank, not making a sound, and they dropped their hooks into the pool. Father stood under a hemlock tree, and Almanzo sat under a tent of cedar boughs and watched the raindrops dimpling the water. Suddenly he saw a silver flash in the air. Father had hooked a trout. It slithered and gleamed through the falling rain as Father flipped it to the grassy bank. Almanzo jumped up and remembered just in time not to shout. Then he felt a tug at his line. The tip of his rod bent almost to the water, and he jerked it upwards with all his might. A shimmering big fish came up on the end of his line. It struggled and slipped in his hands, but he got it off the hook. A beautiful speckled trout, even larger than Father's. He held it up for Father to see. Then he baited his hook and flung out his line again. Fish always bite well when the raindrops are falling on the river. Father got another one, and Almanzo got two. Then Father pulled out two more, and Almanzo got another one even bigger than the first. In no time at all, they had 2 strings of good trout. Father admired Almanzo's, and Almanzo admired Father's, and they tramped home through the clover in the rain. They were so wet they couldn't be wetter, and their skins were glowing warm. Out in the rain by the chopping block at the woodpile, they cut off the heads of the fish, and they scraped off the silvery scales, and they cut the fish open and stripped out their insides. The big milk pan was full of trout, and Mother dipped them in cornmeal and fried them for dinner. Now this afternoon, Monzo can help me churn, said Mother. The cows were giving so much milk that churning must be done twice a week. Mother and the girls were tired of churning, and on rainy days, Almanzo had to do it. In the whitewashed cellar, the big wooden barrel churn stood on its wooden legs, half full of cream. Almanzo turned the handle, and the churn rocked. Inside, the cream went chug, splash, chug, splash. Almanzo had to keep rocking the churn till the chugging broke the cream into grains of butter swimming in buttermilk. Then Almanzo drank a mug of acidy, creamy buttermilk and ate cookies, while Mother skimmed out the grainy butter and washed it in the round wooden butter bowl. She washed every bit of buttermilk out of it, and then she salted it and packed the firm golden butter in her butter tubs. Fishing wasn't the only summer fun. Some July evening, Father would say, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Tomorrow we'll go berrying." Almanzo didn't say anything, but inside he was all one joyful yell. Before dawn the next day, they were all riding away in the lumber wagon, wearing their oldest clothes and taking pails and bushel baskets and a big picnic lunch. They drove far into the mountains near Lake Chateauguay. I think it's Chateauguay, where the wild huckleberries and blueberries grew. The woods were full of other wagons and other families berrying. They laughed and sang, and all among the trees you could hear their talking. Every year they all met friends here that they didn't see any other time. But all of them were busily picking berries. They talked while they worked. The leafy low bushes covered the ground in open spaces among the trees. Blue-black berries clustered thickly under the leaves, and there was a syrupy smell in the hot, still sunshine. Birds had come to feast in the berry patches, and the air was aflutter with wings, and angry blue jays flew scolding at the heads of the pickers. Once 2 blue jays attacked Alice's sunbonnet, and Almanzo had to beat them off. And once he was picking by himself, and behind a big cedar tree, he met a black bear. The bear was standing on his hind legs, stuffing berries into his mouth with both furry paws. Almanzo stood stock still, and so did the bear. Almanzo stared, and the bear stared back at him with little scared eyes above his motionless paws. Then the bear dropped on all fours and ran waddling away into the woods. At noon, the picnic baskets were opened by a spring, and all around in the cool shade people ate and talked. Then they drank at the spring and went back to the berry patches. Early in the afternoon, the bushel baskets and all the pails were full, and Father drove home. They were all a little sleepy, soaked in sunshine and breathing the fruity smell of the berries. For days, Mother and the girls made jellies and jams and preserves, and for every meal there was a huckleberry pie or a blueberry pudding. Then one evening at supper, Father said, "It's time Mother and I had a vacation. We're thinking of spending a week at Uncle Andrew's. Can you children take care of things and behave yourselves while we're gone?" I'm sure Eliza Jane and Royal can look after the place for a week, Mother said, and with Alice and Almanzo to help them. Almanzo looked at Alice, and they both looked at Eliza Jane. Then they all looked at Father and said, "Yes, Father." So let's talk about this chapter a minute. It's amazing, okay, how they did things. Do you know why they grew the pumpkins in around the corn? Because once you plowed them, right, and then you hoed the weeds and the corn was up to a certain height, the pumpkin vines were going, and they would go and spread their leafy vines all around, and they would keep the weeds at bay and the predators, the like raccoons and stuff, into the corn. Milk-fed pumpkin. I don't know how true that is, but I'm going to say that if you pick a pumpkin on a vine and you trim back the vine and you trim back all the flowers and all the baby pumpkins off that vine except for the one closest to the root, that's going to be the pumpkin that's going to grow the biggest. Of course, it grew bigger than every other one in the field because they stripped it of all the other blossoms. There was only one pumpkin being fed by that vine, not several. Oh my God. We used to go berry picking on the one, I think it was called the 147, in between Apsley and Alcove. Not Alcove, Havelock. And we used to call it the Berry Flats. And it was perfect. It had a lot of acidic soil because there was a lot of iron and stuff in the rock. And it was lots of flat rock with trees, but the sunny patches in between the trees on the rocks, there would be moss and blueberry bushes. The only problem with picking blueberries was the deer flies and horse flies. They would just take chunks out of you. But yeah, blueberry, we used to go blueberry picking. Blackberry picking and raspberry picking was a lot harder. You had to wear long sleeves and you had to wear long jeans and tuck because we'd go up in between they would have hydro cuts up over the hills and in between the woods, right? And in the middle of the woods, there'd be these hydro cuts on the hills, and they'd be just loaded with blackberries and brambleberries and thimbleberries and raspberries. But they tore at your clothes and your skin. Aaron and Mikey and I would go berry picking, or a lot of times it would be just Aaron and I, and we would come home with a half a pail of blackberries, but it was a lot of work, and you had to want it. I'll never forget my sister being, I don't know, 26 maybe at the time, made a blackberry pie. Now, blackberries and thimbleberries, blackberries are like little black caps, but these were like big blackberries. We called them thimbleberries because they were like that big and juicy. And my sister made a blackberry pie or a thimbleberry pie, but she didn't. There's ways of making a blackberry pie so that if you don't want the seeds, you've got to press some of those berries. If you don't want all of the seeds, you take half the berries and you press them through a sieve, and you use the pulp and juice with more berries, and you thicken that juice. My sister just dumped all them berries in the pie and sugar, and it ran juice all over the place. And my nephew Andrew ate so many blackberries that he exploded in his diaper. I was so traumatized, right? I was so traumatized. So yeah, Mikey wouldn't have gone berry picking with it. It would have been me and Aaron. But I'm telling you, I was so traumatized by the blue-green seed stuff that came out at the legs of his diapers. Oh my God. We have wild strawberries all over the place. I just can't pick them because they're down the hill here, and I know where they are, but I can't get out down in the ditch and then up the hill to get them anymore. Had currants in the backyard, red and white. I have black currants. I'm actually going to be making rootings from those plants this year. So, but oh man, I miss berry picking. And you know what? I think I'm going to plant some blackberry bushes up closer to the road, and just see what happens. Like, but you can get thornless ones, but I mean, I want the nice big juicy ones because once they go, and they take over. So it's got to be a place where you don't like. I have berry bushes out back, but I can never get to them. But Howie always seems to manage to pick a cup of raspberries to go into my black currant jam when it's ready, or when my black currants are ready. Oh, um, how about barbaric? Stop spamming. Carol Toy. You deleted message. I'm sorry, Carrie. Yeah, you what happened was, um, what happened there was you got timed out because Magic Mike, it doesn't like people shouting at me. He thinks you're shouting at me or putting too many capitals in and stuff like that. So let me see how long the next chapter is. It's a really long chapter. So let's just do it. Eh? You want the second chapter? Keeping house? What do you say? Lots of wild raspberries along crossroads. That's the problem though. You have to go into the ditch and stuff. Right? I need to plant them. I might plant them in my little garden out back, but I need to plant them somewhere where I can have access to them. Yeah, I know. No. Don't say goodbye, Carol Toy. Magic Mike is a night bot. He is a digital moderator. And if you use too many capitals or too many emoticons, he times you out. That's all. So I'm really sorry, but that's just the way it is, right? All right. Chapter 18. Keeping house. Uncle Andrew lived 10 miles away. For a week, Father and Mother were getting ready to go, and all the time they were thinking of things that must be done while they were away. Even when Mother was climbing into the buggy, she was talking. Be sure to gather the eggs every night, she said, and I depend on you, Eliza Jane, to take care of the churning. Don't salt the butter too much. Pack it in the small tub and be sure to cover it. Remember not to pick the beans and peas I'm saving for seed. Now, you all be good while we're gone. She was tucking her hoops down between the seat and the dashboard. Father spread the lap robe. And mind, Eliza Jane, be careful of the fires. Don't you leave the house while there's a fire in the cook stove. And don't get to scuffling with lighted candles, whatever you do. And Father tightened the reins and the horses started. Don't eat all the sugar, Mother called back. The buggy turned into the road. The horses began to trot, rapidly taking Father and Mother away. In a little while, the sound of the buggy wheels ceased. Father and Mother were gone. Nobody said anything. Even Eliza Jane looked a little scared. The house and the barns and the fields seemed very big and empty. For a whole week, Father and Mother would be 10 miles away. Suddenly, Almanzo threw his hat in the air and yelled. Alice hugged herself and cried, What do we do first? They could do anything they liked. There was nobody to stop them. We'll do the dishes and make the beds, Eliza Jane said bossy. Let's make ice cream, shouted Royal. Eliza Jane loved ice cream. She hesitated and said, Well, Almanzo ran after Royal to the ice house. They dug a block of ice out of the sawdust and put it in a grain sack. They laid the sack on the back porch and pounded it with hatchets till the ice was crushed. Eliza Jane came out to watch them while she whipped egg whites on a platter. She beat them with a fork till they were too stiff to slip, and then she tilted the platter. Eliza Jane measured milk and cream and dipped up sugar from the barrel in the pantry. It was not common maple sugar, but white sugar bought from the store. Mother used it only when company came. Eliza Jane dipped 6 cupfuls. Then she smoothed the sugar that was left and you would hardly have missed any. I have an itch. Ah. She made a big milk pail of yellow custard. They set the pail in a tub and packed the snowy crushed ice around it with salt, and they covered it all with a blanket. Every few minutes, they took off the blanket and uncovered the pail and stirred the freezing ice cream. When it was frozen, Alice brought saucers and spoons, and Almanzo brought out a cake and the butcher knife. He cut enormous pieces of cake while Eliza Jane heaped the saucers. They could eat all the ice cream and cake they wanted to. No one would stop them. At noon, they had eaten the whole cake and almost all the ice cream. Eliza Jane said it was time to get dinner, but the others didn't want any dinner. Almanzo said, "All I want is a watermelon." Alice jumped up. "Goody, let's go get one." "Alice," Eliza Jane cried, "you come right back here and do the breakfast dishes." "I will," Alice called out, "when I come back." Alice and Almanzo went into the hot melon field, where the melons lay all around above their wilting flat leaves. Almanzo snapped his finger against the green rinds and listened. When a melon sounded ripe, it was ripe, and when it sounded green, it was green. But when Almanzo said a melon sounded ripe, Alice thought it sounded green. There wasn't really any way to know, though Almanzo was sure he knew more about melons than any girl. So in the end, they picked 6 of the biggest melons and they lugged them one by one to the ice house and put them on the damp, cold sawdust. Then Alice went to the house to do the dishes. Almanzo said he wasn't going to do anything. Maybe he'd go swimming. But as soon as Alice was out of sight, he skipped through the barns and stole into the pasture where the colts were. The pasture was big and the sun was very hot. The air shimmered and wavered with heat, and the little insects made a shrill sound. Bess and Beauty were lying down in the shade of a tree, and their little colts stood near them, wagging their small, bushy tails and straddling a little on their long, gangly legs. The yearlings and the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds were grazing. All of them lifted their heads and stared at Almanzo. He went slowly towards them, holding out his hand. There wasn't anything in his hand, but they didn't know that. He didn't mean to do anything. He only wanted to get near enough to pet them. Starlight and the other little colt ran wobbling to their mothers, and Bess and Beauty lifted their heads and looked, then laid them down again. The big colts all pricked up their ears. One big colt stepped towards Almanzo, then another. The 6 big colts were all coming. Almanzo wished he had brought carrots for them. They were so beautiful and free and big, tossing their manes and showing the whites of their eyes. The sunshine glistened on their strong arched necks and on the muscles of their chests. Suddenly, one of them said, "Whoosh!" One of them had kicked, and one of them squealed, and all at once their heads went up and their tails went up and their hooves thundered on the ground. All their brown haunches and high black tails were turned to Almanzo. Like a thundering whirlwind, those 6 colts went around the tree, and Almanzo heard them behind him. He whirled around. He saw their pounding hooves and big chests coming straight at him. They were running too fast to stop. There wasn't time to get out of the way. Almanzo's eyes shut, and he yelled, "Whoa!" The air and the ground shook. His eyes opened. He saw Brown Horse's knees rising up in the air. A round belly and hind legs rushed overhead. Brown sides went behind him like thunder. His hat flew off. He felt stunned. One of the 3-year-olds had jumped over him. The colts were thundering across the pasture, and Almanzo saw Royal coming. "Leave those colts be!" Royal shouted. He came up and said that for a cent he'd give Almanzo a licking he'd remember. "You know better than to fool with those colts," Royal said. He took Almanzo by the ear. Almanzo trotted, but his ear was pulled all the way to the barns. He said he hadn't done anything. Royal wouldn't listen. "Let me catch you in that pasture again, and I'll whale the hide off you," Royal said. "And I'll tell Father, too." Almanzo went away rubbing his ear. He went down to Trout River and swam in the swimming hole till he felt better. But he thought it wasn't fair that he was the youngest in the family. That afternoon, the melons were cold, and Almanzo carried them to the grass under the balsam tree in the yard. Royal stuck the big butcher knife into the dewy green rinds, and every melon was so ripe that the rinds cracked open. Almanzo and Alice and Eliza Jane and Royal bit deep into the juicy cold slices. They ate till they could eat no more. Almanzo pinched the sleek black seeds, popping them at Eliza Jane until she made him quit. Then he slowly ate the last slice of melon, and he said, "I'm going to fetch Lucy to eat up the rinds." You will not do any such thing," Eliza Jane said. "The idea! A dirty old pig in the front yard." "She is not either, a dirty old pig," said Almanzo. "Lucy's a little young, clean pig, and pigs are the cleanest animals, they are. You just ought to see the way Lucy keeps her bed clean and turns it up and airs it and makes it every day. Horses won't do that, nor cows, nor sheep, nor anything. Pigs, I guess I know that. I guess I know as much about pigs as you do," Eliza Jane said. "Then don't you call Lucy dirty. She's just as clean as you be." Well, Mother told you to obey me," Eliza Jane answered, "and I'm not going to waste melon rinds on any pig. I'm going to make watermelon rind preserves." "I guess they're as much as my rinds as they are yours," Almanzo began, but Royal got up and said, "Come along, Monzo, it's chore time." Almanzo said no more, but when the chores were done, he let Lucy out of her pen. The little pig was white as a lamb, and she liked Almanzo. Her little curled tail quirked whenever she saw him. She followed him to the house, grunting happily, and she squealed for him at the door till Eliza Jane said she couldn't hear herself think. After supper, Almanzo took a plate of scraps and fed them to Lucy. He sat on the back steps and scratched her prickly back. Pigs enjoy that. In the kitchen, Eliza Jane and Royal were arguing about candy. Royal wanted some, but Eliza Jane said that candy pulls were only for winter evenings. Royal said he didn't see why candy wouldn't be just as good in the summer. Almanzo thought so too, and he went in and sided with Royal. Alice said she knew how to make candy. Eliza Jane wouldn't do it, but Alice mixed sugar and molasses and water and boiled them. Then she poured the candy on buttered plates and set it on the porch to cool. They rolled up their sleeves and buttered their hands and ready to pull it, and Eliza Jane buttered her hands too. All the time Lucy was squealing for Almanzo. He went out to see if the candy was cool enough, and he thought his little pig should have some. The candy was cool. No one was watching, so he took a big wad of the soft brown candy and dropped it over the edge of the porch into Lucy's wide open mouth. Then they all pulled candy. They pulled it into long strands and doubled the strands and pulled again. Every time they doubled it, they took a bite. It was very sticky. It stuck to their teeth and their fingers and their faces. Somehow it got in their hair and stuck, and when Almanzo dropped some on the floor, it stuck there. It should have become hard and brittle, but it didn't. They pulled and they pulled till it was soft and sticky. Long past bedtime, they gave it up and went to bed. Next morning, when Almanzo started to do the chores, Lucy was standing in the yard. Her tail hung limp and her head hung down. She did not squeal when she saw him. She shook her head sadly and wrinkled her nose. Where her teeth should have been, there was a smooth brown streak. Lucy's teeth were stuck together with candy. She could not eat. She could not drink. She could not even squeal. She could not grunt. But when she saw Almanzo coming, she ran. Almanzo yelled for Royal. They chased Lucy all around the house under the snowball bushes and the lilacs. They chased her all over the garden. Lucy whirled and dodged and ducked and ran like anything. All the time she didn't make a sound. She couldn't. Her mouth was so full of candy. She ran between Royal's legs and upset him. Almanzo almost grabbed her and went sprawling on his nose. She tore through the peas and squashed the ripe tomatoes and uprooted the green round cabbages. Eliza Jane kept telling Royal and Almanzo to catch her. Alice ran after her. At last they cornered her. She dashed around Alice's skirts. Almanzo fell on her and grabbed. She kicked and tore a long hole down the front of his blouse. Almanzo held her down. Alice held her kicking hind legs, and Royal pried her mouth open and scraped out the candy. Then how Lucy squealed. She squealed all the squeals that had been up in her all night, all the squeals she couldn't squeal while they were chasing her, and she ran screaming to her pen. Almanzo James Wilder, just look at yourself, Eliza Jane scolded. He couldn't. He didn't want to. Eliza Jane was horrified because he had wasted candy on a pig, and his blouse was ruined. It could be patched, but the patch would show. I don't care, Almanzo said. He was glad it was a whole week before Mother would know. That day they made ice cream again, and they ate the last cake. Alice said she knew how to make a pound cake. She said she'd make one, and then she was going to go and sit in the parlor. Almanzo thought that wouldn't be any fun, but Eliza Jane said, "You'll do no such thing, Alice. You know very well the parlor's just for company." It was not Eliza Jane's parlor, and Mother hadn't said she couldn't sit in it. Almanzo thought that Alice could sit in the parlor if she wanted to. That afternoon, he came into the kitchen to see if the pound cake was done. Alice was taking it out of the oven. It smelled so good that he broke a little piece off the corner. Then Alice cut a slice to hide the broken place, and then they ate 2 more slices with the last of the ice cream. I can make more ice cream, Alice said. Eliza Jane was upstairs, and Almanzo said, "Let's go into the parlor." They tiptoed in without making a sound. The light was dim because the blinds were down, but the parlor was beautiful. The wallpaper was white and gold, and the carpet was of Mother's best weaving, almost too fine to step on. The center table was marble-topped, and it held the tall parlor lamp, all white and gold china and pink-painted roses. Beside it lay the photograph album, with covers of red velvet and mother of pearl. All along the wall stood solemn horsehair chairs, and George Washington's picture looked sternly from its frame between the windows. Alice hitched up her hoops behind and sat on the sofa. The slippery haircloth slid her right off onto the floor. She didn't dare laugh out loud for fear Eliza slid off. When company came and they had to sit in, they kept themselves on the slippery chairs by pushing their toes against the floor. But now they could let go and slide. They slid off the sofa and the chairs till Alice was giggling so hard they didn't dare slide any more. Then they looked at the shells and the coral and the little china figures on the whatnot. They didn't touch anything. They looked till they heard Eliza Jane coming downstairs. Then they ran tiptoe out of the parlor and shut the door without a sound. Eliza Jane didn't catch them. It seemed a week that would last forever, but suddenly it was gone. One morning at breakfast, Eliza Jane said, "Mother and Father will be home tomorrow." They all stopped eating. The garden had not been weeded. The peas and beans had not been picked, so the vines were ripening too soon. The hen house had not been whitewashed. "This house is a sight," Eliza Jane said, "and we must churn today, but what am I going to tell Mother? The sugar is all gone." Nobody ate any more. They looked into the sugar barrel, and they could see the bottom of it. Only once Alice tried to be cheerful. "Well, we must hope for the best," she said, like Mother. "There's some sugar left. Mother said don't eat all the sugar, and we didn't. There's some around the edges." This was only the beginning of that awful day. They all went to work as hard as they could. Royal and Almanzo hoed the garden. They whitewashed the hen house. They cleaned the cow stalls and swept the south barn floor. The girls were sweeping and scrubbing in the house. Eliza Jane made Almanzo churn till the butter came, and then her hands flew while she washed and salted it and packed it in the tub. There was only bread and butter and jam for dinner, though Almanzo was starved. No, Almanzo. Oh, excuse me. Now, Almanzo, you polish the heater, Eliza Jane said. He hated to polish stoves, but he hoped Eliza Jane would not tell that he had wasted candy on his pig. He went to work with the stove blacking and the brush. Eliza Jane was hurrying and nagging. Be careful, don't spill the polish, she said, busily dusting. Almanzo guessed he knew enough not to spill the stove polish, but he didn't say anything. Use less water, Almanzo, and mercy, rub harder than that. He didn't say anything. Eliza Jane went into the parlor to dust it. She called, Almanzo, that stove done now? No, Almanzo said. Goodness, don't dawdle so. Almanzo muttered, Whose boss are you? Eliza Jane asked, What's that you say? Nothing, Almanzo said. Eliza Jane came to the door. You did say something. You did say something. Almanzo straightened up and shouted, I said, Whose boss are you? Eliza Jane gasped, and then she cried out, You just wait, Almanzo James Wilder. You just wait till I tell Mother. Almanzo didn't mean to throw the blackening brush. It flew right out of his hand, sailed past Eliza Jane's head, and smack, hit the parlor wall. A great splash and smear of blacking appeared on the white and gold wallpaper. My parents had white and gold wallpaper. Alice screamed. Almanzo turned around and ran all the way to the barn. He climbed into the haymow and crawled far back into the hay. He did not cry, but he would have cried if he hadn't been almost 10 years old. Mother would come home and find he had ruined her beautiful parlor. Father would take him into the woodshed and whip him with the black snake whip. He didn't ever want to come out of the haymow. He wished he could stay there forever. After a long while, Royal came into the haymow and called him. He crawled out of the hay, and he saw that Royal knew. Manny, you'll get an awful whipping, Royal said. Royal was sorry, but he couldn't do anything. They both knew that Almanzo deserved whipping, and there was no way to keep Father from knowing it. So Almanzo said, I don't care. He helped do the chores, and he ate supper. He wasn't hungry, but he ate to show Eliza Jane that he didn't care. He went to bed. The parlor door was shut, but he knew how the black splotch looked on the white gold wall. Next day, Father and Mother came driving into the yard. Almanzo had to go out to meet them with the others. Alice whispered to him, Don't feel bad. Maybe they won't care. But she looked anxious, too. Father said cheerfully, Well, here we are. Been getting along all right? Yes, Father, Royal answered. Almanzo didn't go to help unhitch the driving horses. He stayed in the house. Mother hurried about looking at everything while she untied her bonnet strings. I declare, Eliza Jane and Alice, she said, you've kept the house as well as I'd done myself. Mother, Alice said in a small voice. Mother? Well, child, what is it? Mother, Alice said bravely, you told us not to eat all the sugar. Mother, we ate almost all of it. Mother laughed. You've all been so good, she said. I won't scold you about the sugar. She did not know that the black splotch was on the parlor wall. The parlor door was shut. She did not know it that day, nor all the next day. Almanzo could hardly choke down his food at mealtimes, and Mother worried. She took him into the pantry and made him swallow a big spoon of the horrible black medicine she had made of roots and herbs. He did not want her to know about the black splotch, and yet he wished she did know. Then the worst would be over and he could stop dreading it. That second evening, they heard a buggy driving into the yard. Mr. and Mrs. Webb were in it. Father and Mother went out to meet them, and in a minute they came into the dining room. Almanzo heard Mother saying, "Come right into the parlor." He couldn't move. He could not speak. This was worse than anything he had thought of. Mother was so proud of her beautiful parlor. She was so proud of keeping it always nice. She didn't know he had ruined it, and now she was taking company in. They would see that big black splotch on the wall. Mother opened the parlor door and went in. Mrs. Webb went in, and Mr. Webb and Father. Almanzo saw only their backs, but he heard the window shades going up. He saw that the parlor was full of light. It seemed to him a long time before anybody said anything. Then Mother said, "Take this big chair, Mr. Webb, and make yourself comfortable. Right here on the sofa, Mrs. Webb." Almanzo couldn't believe his ears. Mrs. Webb said, "You have such a beautiful parlor. I declare it's almost too fine to sit in." Now Almanzo could see where the blackening brush had hit the wall, and he could not believe his eyes. The wallpaper was pure white and gold. There was no black splotch. Mother caught sight of him and said, "Come in, Almanzo." Almanzo went in. He sat straight up on a haircloth chair and pushed his toes against the floor to keep from sliding off. Father and Mother were telling all about their visit to Uncle Andrew's. There was no black splotch anywhere on the wall. "Didn't you worry leaving the children alone here and you so far away?" Mrs. Webb asked. "No," Mother said proudly. "I knew the children would take care of everything as well as if James and I were here. Were to home, sorry. As well as if James and I were to home." Almanzo minded his manners and did not say a word. Next day, when no one was looking, he stole into the parlor. He looked carefully at the place where the black splotch had been. The wallpaper was patched. The patch had been cut out carefully all around the golden scrolls, and the pattern was fitted perfectly, and the edges of the patch scraped so thin he could hardly find them. He waited until he could speak to Eliza Jane alone, and then he asked her, "Eliza Jane, did you patch the parlor wallpaper for me?" "Yes," she said. I got the scraps of wallpaper that were saved in the attic and cut out the patch and put it on with flour paste." Almanzo said gruffly, "I'm sorry I threw the brush at you, honest." I didn't mean to, Eliza Jane." "I guess I was aggravating," she said, "but I didn't mean to be. You're the only little brother I've got." Almanzo had never known before how much he liked Eliza Jane. They never told about the black splotch on the parlor wall, and Mother never knew. Now, we know from historical pictures on the internet that there was actually 6 children, not 4. There was an older sister, Laura. She was older than Eliza Jane and Royal. And there was a younger child, Pearlie. And so we don't know why. Maybe the older sister, they were worried that Laura Wilder would be mistaken with Laura Ingalls Wilder in the book and they left her out. Maybe she was married and moved away, and that's why they never bothered. Maybe Pearlie passed away, or maybe he hadn't been born yet. I don't know. But I know that there was at least 6 children. The belt is coming off now. Yeah. Shame that kids now have no fear of punishment. Yeah, take away their cell phones. Take away their video games, their internet access. Tell me that wouldn't just destroy them. Trust me. When Briar was little and first going to school, I had to sell. We had a PlayStation 2 or 1, PlayStation 1 or 2. And we also had an Xbox. We had to sell them both. You know why? Because Briar is ASD. which is on autism spectrum disorder. And for some reason, any kind of flashing, any kind of flashing a light stimulus of a video screen or TV or anything would disrupt his synapses somehow, and he couldn't function in school. We had to get rid of it all. We had to get rid of it all because he couldn't even watch cartoons before he went to school like normal kids, because it would disrupt his brain, and then he would be like, he wouldn't be able to focus. So yeah, hide their chargers. When they die, right? But Briar, I mean, I got up this morning and took up, like, Briar is renting my tablet on weekends. When I say renting, it's because he's paying for the gas to and from that we pick him up and take him back and forth to work on the weekends. And he's using my tablet for when his work's done and it's quiet in the store. He does, he reads books and stuff on it and listens to music and stuff. But he's paying me for that because he's using my data, because the store has no real good Wi-Fi. So he can't really use his phone. So he gives me $50 a month for that, and I'm grateful, right? They showed Pearlie, Eliza, Royal in the They showed Pearlie, Eliza, and Royal in the series. Yeah, and Eliza Jane wasn't. Yeah, the series, that old series really has very little to do with the reality of their life. It's the reality of the books and the autobiography has left me probably never wanting to see the series again unless they remake it more realistically and more closer to the storyline. Doesn't ASD also cause seizures? I guess it can if you are prone to seizures. Autism spectrum disorder just means he's on the autism spectrum. He's very high functioning and he's not medicated. And I'm really proud of that. He's living life on life's terms, right? He's 27 and never had a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, but he has high social anxiety. I think the fact that he works in convenience stores, absolutely brilliant, and I'm so proud of him because A, his French wasn't that great when he first started, and B, he's working in the public, and that before he used to work as a dishwasher down in the basement kitchen of the mill, right? The kid was a mushroom, and then he'd come home and he'd stay in the basement, so to speak. Eliza became a school sister. Oh, I know. She became a school mistress. My understanding is Pearlie was a disappointment to the family. I want to say gaming debts. Well, in the series, they made Royal the one who was footloose, fancy free with no responsibilities. My youngest is the same, 24 and never had a girlfriend, really shy. Well, I don't think it's that Briar's shy, because when people are nice to him, he's nice right back. He talks to people, he engages in conversation. But I don't think, now this is from actual experience, I don't think he's aware how attractive he is. And it may not necessarily be a physical attraction. It's just that he's a really nice person, right? And he's loyal and he's funny and he's got great taste in music, right? But he doesn't see it. If somebody were to flirt with him, he would probably think they were joking. I know. Do you know how I know? I went through high school not knowing when people were attracted to me. Okay? I was on the autism spectrum. Okay? I'm very much, Briar doesn't fall very far from this tree, except I got medicated when he was a baby. And I've never been able to go off it. So we were really grateful to get him off it in grade 9. But I mean, I went through high school, and it wasn't until after high school when I was doing upgrading at Sir Sanford Fleming, or when I was a young mother before I met Howie and I was at a flea market, and people would, I would be visiting at a friend's and somebody from high school would pop in and say, "Don't you remember me, Bev?" I said hi to you every day in the halls at school. Or I'd be at a flea market and somebody would come up and say, "Oh, hi, how are you? I noticed you looking at kid socks earlier." He said, "Don't you remember we were, I'd say I was in high school with you, Bev." I never saw them looking. I never paid it. When someone said hello to me, I thought they were just being polite. Okay. So, Pearly Day was the irresponsible one. Royal had 2 boys and a daughter. Really? The problem with us nice boys is we got put in the friend zone way too many times. Well, I don't I don't think he understands that there is so many young women out there that would kill for a loyal, loving, sweet man who knows how to cook and play music. She'd have to put up with this, 2 widescreen TVs for video gaming, but seriously, dude? You know? Anyway, listen, guys, we've been here almost an hour and we've just been shooting the crap. So, yeah, my son is one of the, I call him the Sasquatch. His hair's down to his waist, and he accidentally trimmed his mustache the wrong way, so he shaved off his beard, and he has this because he's put on a bit of weight, but he's got this really round face with a dimple in his chin, and he's like, "Oh God, oh." Ugh. I said, "Yeah, grow the beard back, right?" But I mean, because if he was thinner, his face. I have pictures of him. I have a picture of him with his guitar, playing a guitar when his hair was in a ponytail and in Steve's Music World in Ottawa without a beard, and he's gorgeous, right? But when his face is fuller, he needs the beard. But he's got the sweetest, twinkliest, merry brown eyes, and he's got this super sweet, shy smile that he rarely shows because he has this chipped tooth, and I just love him to pieces. Oh, won't you be my teddy bear? He's a teddy bear, right? But loyal, like loyal, right? My only fear, honestly, is that he'll meet someone, fall in love, and she'll break his heart and he'll never tread out into those waters again. That's my only fear. Well, he trims his mustache and stuff. I mean, a couple of days ago, I went to kiss Howie and I got a mouthful of mustache. And he goes, "Yeah." And so I went like this and I lifted up his mustache so I could get to his lips because he's not allowed to shave his mustache off, right? Howie's just not. But he said, "Yeah, I got to trim it." And so last night I went to give him a kiss and I said, "Oh, you trimmed your mustache." So I got an extra kiss out of it. Anyway, been listening to Farmer Boy up to chapter 12. Oh, cool. I'll play games with the guy. Well, I mean, he's just, he's just my baby. He works, plays video games, and listens to music and reads. That's my son. That's it. That's all, no more. Anyway, my older son, Arthur, has been with Mel for like 8 or 9 years. So I'm going to go on hunger strike soon if they don't start talking about, grandchildren. I promised them the first time I asked them if children were in the future, and they said yes, absolutely. So I promised them, and when I asked that question, I would never bother them again for at least several years. Well, it's been like 5 years. So I'm like, "Where's my grandbabies?" So, every mother's fear. Oh, I mean, it's not just a fear. It's a reality. I had a cousin once, and I was madly in love with him. And he fell in love with one woman. And she had a son, not with him, but she had a son when they met. And she decided she couldn't put up with his drinking or whatever the case may be. And she left him, and he never recovered. He never recovered. Briar's that kind of person, I think. You break his heart, he doesn't give you a chance to break it again. This is the kid who tried my medicated fudge one night for pain in his knee when he was working at the mill. And I didn't realize that sativas would have an effect on him. I never even thought about it. And he ate 2 pieces instead of 1, and he had a panic attack in the middle of the night. He came upstairs, my heart's racing, blah, blah, blah. That kid will never touch any marijuana products ever again. Right? Once bitten, twice shy. He'll never do something again if it hurt him or made him. If he didn't like it, he's done. You know what I mean? Arthur's had his heart broken a couple of times. And when we were leaving New Brunswick, after we picked him up to bring him after his graduation and everything, we were bringing him home with us. Or we went back to pick him up. I can't remember if we brought him home with us or not. But I remember there's this kid, he attracted beautiful, beautiful, beautiful girls. I mean, just look at Mel. But this girl was princess pretty. And I mean princess pretty. And she actually came to say goodbye to him, after she broke up with him. And he was really hurt by it, but he was being really nice. And I walked. My sons are wonderful men. Both my sons are wonderful men. And I'm really grateful. They're my bracket babies. They're my bracket boys. I wanted 15 kids, and I got 2 sons on opposite ends of the spectrum. And that's all I needed. So God said, let her have Arthur and Briar and C-sections. And I quit. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. And I'm sorry for swearing. And but anyway, I'm going to let you go. I've got to go start dinner. And I think I'm going to make a homemade pepperoni pizza tonight. And we'll see you next week for 1, 2, or maybe 3 more chapters of Farmer Boy on Little House Live, Day 20. Thank you. I love you guys. Take care. God bless. And we'll see you next week. Where am I going? There I'm going. Bye-bye, love.